It's really interesting.
No big deal. So I guess I'll start off with a question. We have all these different middlemen within this current media buying system, right? We have the DSPs, the DMPs, the SSPs, the ad verification party platforms, and kind of everyone else involved. My question is, and sort of playing devil's advocate here, is blockchain just putting a Band-Aid on the system rather than solving a lot of these core issues that are wrong with it? And if so, or if not, what can we do to help facilitate that ecosystem from sort of foundationally from the ground up?
It's funny, I think we were having a really lively discussion at the beginning of the night about this. I think the question is twofold really. It's an incentive, that word gets so used a lot. It's a determination problem versus a utility problem, right? So yeah, absolutely, there's a ton of different things that can be used. Like our use case is specific, actionable, real, right? But what you start to trend towards are the things that actually are driven by people in control. So if a holding company decides that something wants to happen and they want to set it up with blockchain, that's the direction things are going to go to move into, instead of actually like de-middlemaning any part of the advertising use. That's just my thoughts on that.
Sure. I could address that. So from the pilot that we're running with MediaOcean, which is around transparency. So with each of the brand agency pairings we have 8 brands and their agencies, then we've got some suppliers. We've done discrete discovery sessions. So we spent about 30 hours with the industry talking very granularly about their workflows. And some of this was, remember what blockchain is and isn't. I always like talking to Mark, because Mark's very sober about what's blockchain. But you have to sort of abstract what can be done with the blockchain, what blockchain is solving, from other stuff. So, we're talking about workflow changes, contract changes. So let's just take an example of the publisher in the long term will benefit from fee transparency. But in the near term, do they want to share what they charge one advertiser versus another? Those near-term incentives aren't necessarily aligned. So we have to be honest about what can be solved, and that there's people and business models that exist in the middle of this, and that these things will take on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's, with all due respect, I don't think it's about people or business models, because that always gets disrupted as technology gets better. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions around what blockchain can be used for. It's really just about replacing middlemen with software, right? And there's a bunch of things that it will force our industry to do in order to be adopted. The most important one is to adopt a consistent metric, right? Like that's the crux of what blockchain will. That's the most powerful thing that blockchain will do. It actually has nothing at all to do with blockchain itself. But once we've adopted a consistent metric, then we can use the blockchain, and then we can remove middlemen from transactions. It doesn't really, you shouldn't use it for transparency. It doesn't fix fraud. All it does is take a middleman who typically today has agency for themselves and optimizes the entire marketplace so that they make more money, and replaces them with a piece of software that doesn't have agency. Like that's literally it. That's as far. I mean, maybe I'm a little bit naive about this, but
I want to push back to that, because when I first met you, and you're brilliant, you scared the shit out of me. So I was believing everything you said. And then I went back and breathed into a bag for a bag. And I realized there is a role, because his original sort of thesis was that blockchain is not applicable to supply chains and everything. I want to hyperventilate it because that's what we're doing. But there is a role. So when you look at what we're doing in MediaOcean, you need to have trust in how the data is endorsed. And there's a difference between endorsement and consensus. So I want to make sure, you're talking about tokenization and trade of assets, I agree. But you have to have standardization between mutual parties for how the data gets in, and that there is a role, especially when you have lack of trust in a network, to have that done to a blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a database ETL. Like you don't actually need a blockchain for the standardization. In fact, you can have people sign messages and put them into a database, or run that through ETL and standardize everything without ever using a blockchain. Here's the thing, right? And I know I'm like offending you. You're so sorry. You will never hear about the true use case of a blockchain from a middleman, because the The sole purpose of a blockchain is to replace a middleman. So when you talk to Amino, right, who's funded by Brian O'Kelly at Nexus, when you talk to MediaOcean, they have a vested interest in keeping the status quo, which is themselves as middlemen, allowing them to rent seek, right? So you will never ever hear about the true use case from a blockchain unless somebody says to you, listen, I run a marketplace and I know I'm going to decentralize myself. We know that we are actively decentralizing our existing business, but the reason that we're doing that is that an open marketplace that actually has the best interests of buyers and sellers instead of middlemen in mind will grow to be much bigger than a marketplace that we could own and operate ourselves. And then we can provide products around the periphery of that, which will make the market better and also make a successful company.
I still
So
push
Dan,
back.
Chad, sorry to cut you off. I just want to hear what I think.
So, I think we have advantage and disadvantages individually of being able to understand what we're all kind of trying to solve. And it was interesting to me listening to everyone. We all kind of are addressing it in different ways. So that's great because individually we all have a different perspective, but the disadvantage, of course, is we don't really know what the others are doing necessarily. And I can tell you from my vantage point that I don't agree with everything I heard Mark say, although I agree with some of it. I think that at the end of the day, what blockchain brings is trust. And if you think that we have a trusting environment within digital advertising, then you don't need it, okay? If you don't trust what's going on within the digital advertising space, then it will play an important role. And I think the difference is going to be, if done properly, if it's a fully decentralized solution, then there won't be a third-party intermediary in between the advertiser or the person spending the money and the person receiving the money. And I would change the verbiage, and I think Mark might agree with me on this maybe. I wouldn't say that there are going to be middlemen, because I think that scares people as ad tech companies. If I'm OpenX, that scares the shit out of me. Because I'm thinking, what are you trying to cut me out of? I provide a service, I'm earning my money, I give you value, and you're now downplaying my importance. If I'm Trade Desk, you're telling me I'm a middleman and I don't provide value. I would say it's more like you're getting rid of gatekeepers. So if in fact you have the demand side paying everyone individually, those players then become, it's all about a la carte, right? Like I like a sundae and I want my fudge and I want my caramel and I want my whipped cream. Well, I'll decide who my DSP is, I'll decide who SSPs I want to work with, I'll decide what third-party verification metrics I want to use, or if I want to use Moat or Double Verify. I'll decide all of that as the demand, and I don't think it's going to solve everything, but the reason why I'm bullish on it is if, let's say it's a big industry, it's a $275 billion industry, if it saves 10, 15, 20%, okay, it doesn't solve all the problems, that's a shit ton of money, and it would be unacceptable as a caretaker of someone else's money or your own. It would be highly uninformed to still say, well, I know I could save 15%, but I'm just going to turn down the hundreds of millions of dollars in savings and a better ROI, and that shifting of money that I could basically take from paper, digital, TV, or paper and move it into digital. I think that it's not going to solve everything, but it certainly will be a major shift forward for the industry.
No, I think we could sit here all night and debate this topic, right? So thank you guys for this. I think I want to sort of change the subject a little bit and kind of talk about challenges that you guys have had with getting people to adopt your business idea, right? Getting them to move over to a blockchain system. Can you talk about some of the challenges and maybe just give each other advice, tips, tricks, things of that nature?
I'll start if you don't mind, Zoran. We are selling technology mostly, and that's the core of the problem, because when people come to me asking to sell them a DSP, a DMP, an SSP, they want it empowered by the blockchain. The biggest challenge to me so far is really explaining them, because it's a lot of hours usually of consulting that isn't paid. And but it's important, and I think that the education challenge is the biggest challenge so far, because until it will get ignorance, and getting back to your previous question, it will be a patch, because it will be just another level of the middleman. Blockchain shouldn't be a middleman.
Agreed.
So then what should...
I just want to make sure people understand the difference between private permission blockchains and public blockchains. So on a public blockchain, there's anonymity. It's such a hard word for me. Anonymity, so you see everything that happens, you don't know who did it. It's the opposite in a private permission blockchain. where you know who everybody is on the network, but everybody doesn't necessarily have the ability to see all the different data that the transactions are strictly permitted. So again, my pushback to Mark is that there is a role, after studying this, for private permission blockchains, and that you can have neutral governance of the validation of the data into a common ledger system. And you might push back into the other database systems, but we look at that, you're not going to have a heterogeneous environment adopting some type of NoSQL database to put that there.
Oh, totally. I mean, if we're talking about a permission blockchain, it's not blockchain. That's distributed ledger technology, and you still have a middleman because you still have to decide who gets into that system.
There has to be governance.
That's actually not true. That's actually not true.
Yeah.
That's not true what you just said.
To bring this back.
What you just said was factually inaccurate. Can I explain why that's inaccurate?
Go ahead.
Here, and it is accurate. What Mark said is talking about today versus what will come. And I like Chad's picture of the baby on the bike. And it's like if you're judging, that versus today, then that would be an accurate statement. Here's why it's wrong. You will be able to in the future write it down, hold me accountable for it. There will be the ability for you to, if you're let's say you're Coca-Cola, okay, my favorite. So you're Coca-Cola, you will be able to spin up your own blockchain. It'll be IBM or somebody else. And you'll be able to identify and pick your nodes the same way you run AWS servers today. You're going to spin it up and you're going to specifically identify that particular company will have profiles, right? So I'm going to say, I'm going to work with Group M because they're one of my profiles I'm working with. And I'm going to work with TDD and I'm going to work with OpenX. And these are my approved ones. They're all going to have nodes. And I'm the customer, and I'm setting all of that up. Now, that doesn't exist today, but that's exactly what will be in the future.
So
why does that need a blockchain? Sorry, hold on a second. If you're Coca-Cola and you spin and you're like, okay, I'm going to use a blockchain to track everything like that's associated with my buy, you absolutely do not need a blockchain. The only time you need a blockchain is in a marketplace when buyers and sellers don't know each other beforehand. If I'm a buyer and I know the supply chain ahead of time, just hit my frickin' API or send me a text message with your take rate. This is bonkers. Like, you do not need a blockchain
to bring this back up maybe a couple levels, just as a final comment, then maybe move to the next question. I think this is more of an emotional horizon problem. We can sit here and talk about public, private, we can talk about which protocols to use, how those protocols apply to whatever. In the 1930s, you used to go up to a whiteboard and you would write down the stock price and then it would get traded. That is actually exactly the same process as FIX, the Financial Information Exchange Protocol, and the many other technologies that came out that did exactly the same thing as that in a different modality. Yes, all of the people who would go up to a board and write down a stock price were out of work as soon as those things showed up. But they found other jobs and the whole ecosystem changed. And I think that's what's happening here. There is, which I actually believe in the version of the version of what you're articulating, a place beyond where we are in programmatic and marketing and advertising right now from a technology perspective, which is more transparent. How we get there, the modalities, what changes about it, what doesn't happen, whether it's public, whether it's private. It matters, absolutely, but it doesn't matter. Because what needs to happen is all of that stuff to move us to get there. And so I guess that's what really the discussion is about, and I wanted to bring it back up there because we could spend all the time in the world down here, but it's an emotional horizon.
Sorry, can I stop you? This gentleman really wants to...
Okay, so I've heard this phrase thrown around a few times today. Don't put something on the blockchain that doesn't need the blockchain. But I haven't heard a convincing, clear example of what needs a blockchain. We don't need a blockchain for currency. We have currency. We don't need a blockchain.
I think it's impressions. I think it's impressions. I think literally, if let's say you're the buyer, right, and you're buying 8 million impressions. Now, part of the debate right now is about whether or not RTV should exist or not exist. I'm not debating any of that. Like, that's a whole different discussion that we're going to, this is about agnostic blockchain in the existing present system, not some other system. So if you paid for 8 million impressions and each one of them is not the same cost, some of them are this cost and some are that cost, you want to know that in fact there were 8 million.
And it's not just the impressions, it's the audience. You want to know that the audience that you're buying is the audience that you're actually serving.
Which actually, by the way, that's where the garbage in, garbage out conversation comes in, because blockchain, different types of blockchain solutions can resolve potentially, and I don't know that because that's not really our field of study, right? Potentially, blockchain can resolve other kinds of DMP type related issues, data related issues. IBM would probably
I think the DMP is going to go away. I think it gets assimilated. So if you heard the kind of decentralized, first of all, the decentralized data marketplace I described, first of all, that's not real time. I just want to make sure that's not integrated into real time bidding. That's something that happens abstracted. You're modeling the data, you're tokenizing it for exchange. doesn't have to happen on a short time cycle. But if you think of the implications of that, all this data is in there, it gets modeled, the machines can see it without data leakage. That is fulfilling the role of the DMP. So it's actually doing the dynamic cohort modeling within something that doesn't need an external.
To add to that and to answer your question directly, is the reason the DMP is one of the actual places, it's a centralized tool, right? The only reason the DMP exists is so that a brand or a publisher or whoever's holding the DMP can look through their stuff, resell the data, and reconcile things. If it's being reconciled at every point in the ecosystem, that business model problem, and that's what it is, it's not technology, it's a business model, it goes away. That's one actual real use case where the blockchain can actually help.
So,
But can't there just be like a DMP service where everybody is constantly reconciling?
I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's actually more across the ecosystem at different points as opposed to one
Right,
place.
but this is just like a theoretical question of if we could trust some service to provide data reconciliation that's the same as the blockchain, isn't it?
I think IBM is going to kill that better than anybody.
That's
I can answer your question.
Right.
The use of a blockchain is to have sovereign ownership of something and enable. Sovereign means nobody else can tell you what you can do. So when you said we already have currency, with QE2 or yeah, you have QE2 or QE3. They press a button, they inflate monetary supply, and they basically dilute the dollars that you have. So the benefit of Bitcoin is that you have sovereign control of the money. There's a scheduled sort of inflation of money supply, and also nobody can tell you how you can spend that money or where you can spend that money. So that's the benefit when you talk about currency. The benefit in a marketplace is that you don't have a middleman with agency, right? And what middlemen will always do, and there's no fault to them, right? Like they have a business. What a middleman will always do is optimize the marketplace so they make more money. Right? When you replace that middleman with software, then you have something that sits in the middle that doesn't have agency and acts in the best interest of the edges of the network, and that returns value to the edges. So that's really the only use case of a blockchain.
So this is sovereign software.
No, it's software that enables the sovereign ownership of an asset or value, and then allows for the transaction of that without a person or without an entity that's controlled by somebody.
How do I trust the software?
Well, because you can see it and it's immutable because of all of the stuff with. I mean, it's more than we have time to unpack today.
It's like a smart contract.
It's more about like about the consensus and what the work the miners are doing to enable the security of the blockchain. So basically, the smart contract is a piece of JavaScript that sits on the blockchain and can't be changed, right? So if you and I are going to make a transaction, we can both look at that JavaScript and we're like, if we send our money to that, we know what's going to happen. Versus a bookie, if we're making a bet like about a baseball game, we send our money to the bookie and he might just be like, no, I like you better than me because I'm a jerk and like I make fun of everybody, so you get all of the money, right? So that's really the use case of the blockchain is the ability for people to transact without somebody in the middle who might either optimize the marketplace for their own benefit or tell them what they can do.
And Mark, I want to just turn over.
I want to just say one thing, and I hate to throw another Molotov cocktail here. If someone talks about mining within the digital advertising system, I think it is a wrong way to look at it. It is not well suited.
What should the consensus model be?
It could be a number of things. I definitely think it certainly should be proof of stake, not to get too technical for you guys, because I don't want to create some sort of like, my blockchain is better. I'm just saying, the problem within a lot of the problems is if it's mining, then that means it's inherently slow, and not only is it slow, there's a cost associated with that. Now, you could vary. So I would only make the argument that as blockchain technology continues to evolve, just as Bitcoin was only, which is typically conflated, blockchain and Bitcoin are conflated, but they're not. Bitcoin sits on top of blockchain. Okay, get rid of Bitcoin, Ethereum sits on top of blockchain. Get rid of Ethereum, Hyperledger, Stellar sit on top of blockchain. So you can get rid of the cryptocurrency, the blockchain can still exist, and the blockchain can still be the foundation of what you're trying to do, with or without a cryptocurrency.
I'm sorry, just to add on top of what everyone said. There are different types of blockchains, and I don't want to go into the roots. It could be with mining, it could be without mining. Just to the roots of your question, you asked like, what would be the right appliance to the blockchain? The right appliance would be the one that proves effectiveness first.
Correct. Yeah.
In the coldest time, and full stop. I mean, every one of us is right, but the blockchain that solves first problems and won't cause more problems, you know.
It's a winner takes all model.
Yeah,
The first
it's
one
about the winner.
Yeah,
It's about who solves the problems against who gets early into the doors because they have more money to throw advertising around. So that's all about it.
I want to throw it back to you.
Yeah, I just want to build on the gentleman's question a little bit. Like, how do we communicate that trust to an average Joe? Like, we have the green lock in the browser that communicates, we have this SSL connection, you can trust the communication to Bank of America. How do we communicate that to your average end user without just saying, it's a smart contract and everyone trusts it?
Can you trust SSL?
Super green lock. Sorry?
Can you trust SSL?
I mean, but the average human being sees a green lock in their browser and has some modicum of trust in
The
it.
answer to your question, I think the average Joe, as you call it, don't need to understand how it works, just has to.
That's more of a marketing question. It's like, we were having this discussion about taglines, right? A tagline can be total bullshit, but you believe it if it's well delivered. And actually, in a lot of ways, particularly with this conversation, the delivery is completely different to the communication. Like, none of us are ever going to get on TV and go in depth into the difference between different types of chains, why they're secure, why they're risky.
Nobody knows how SSL
No
works.
one knows how SSL works, but they trust it because there's a green check.
Right. So what's the green check?
I think there's one use case. I don't know if it's applicable to this industry, but like one use case could be if you have we had a problem with Experian, right? They get hacked. So if you, I think we're in it. Once again, I keep going to IBM because I really think their vision of the world is right. I mean, they really got it down, and I really respect what they're doing. You have an ID. We're gonna have an ID based on a blockchain identity. Okay. Now, if you're going to pick and choose, I think in the future, who's going to have access to that data? It could be advertisers, hypothetically. It could be healthcare system. It could be getting access. It could be somebody looked at your FBI file, and because it's immutable, blockchain can tell you if someone reviewed it and who reviewed it. And like Edward Snowden, not to like political, Edward Snowden was essentially an systems admin. Okay, so he was kind of like the god level of creating of managing the database. He could do anything at any time, and no one really could control him or see what he did or how much he downloaded. So literally, blockchain will have the ability to prevent the president, Edward Snowden, or anyone else, I think, from a governmental security perspective, to basically ensure that if someone reviewed a particular file, you would know who did. If someone downloaded a particular file, you would know exactly who did. And because it's immutable, because it's managed in a decentralized way, there won't be any way to manipulate it.
To add to that very quickly, I think actually what you're asking about is a mazes fallacy question. It's the same reason when you open your phone, if you use your fingerprint to open it, you believe it, even if it's totally insecure. So I think it's actually more about...
We all know that SSL may or may not be
some
secure,
4.0 has been broken for like 5 years.
that you communicate to the person.
It's a mazes fallacy question about control as opposed to a technical
You need
question.
open source protocols as well. They need to be inspected. You need to be able to see. That's what we
Look at that.
But another thing I just want to say, so we made an announcement with a company called Hue.manatee.co a couple weeks ago. And what they've done that's really interesting around consumer data is they've created a legal title entity. So a lot of their efforts around lobbying and trying to get the laws changed so that there is not just a fundamental right for the consumer to ownership of that data, but there's a fundamental implied value to that data, and it's titled like any piece of property. And so they're starting in the healthcare space where you have high value data that you've already paid for. Like if I go to the doctor and I get my panel work done, that I paid a lot of money for that data. If that's encrypted and I want to be able to go share that with Pfizer who's running a trial and get paid for that, I should be able to do that and make sure that the transfer of that data is secure and the provenance and the encryption keys are released per permissions, whether it's enough time or one-time use. And they're also creating a collective bargaining platform around that as well.
So identity is kind of the holy grail of blockchain, right? Whoever
It's a
wins
holy
the
grail.
identity race is going to win.
I still don't have
Identity is going to be big.
Yeah.
Mark
It's
still
really
doesn't have it.
consumer level.
Yeah, I still think Mark needs to come to Jesus on so identity.
I think Mark needs to come to God, bro.
No, I think there's still a word, because if there is, by the way, if there is another.
Guys, there's beer in the back.
It's Friday night. Mark's brilliant.
He's really brilliant.
You know, the only reason I have this stylus is I'm scared that he's right? So, but the point is, if there is another distributed ledger technology that can manage the governance and trust of data from, including Oracle data, every transaction in a large supply chain, and I'd like to know what that solution is. So it isn't launching. I haven't found one that actually we can build solutions and applications on smart contracts with that's not blockchain. So I'm in the market for it if it can be done.
Is it okay if I ask again?
Absolutely.
Make the conversation. Okay, so it's like two questions that are like really asking the same thing. One is for everything, Mark, and Dan. So, Mark, you said that we need blockchain to enable a consistent metric.
No, but I think blockchains will force us to adopt a consistent metric in order to properly use them. I think the biggest upside to blockchain might be that it forces us to fix the metrics that we use. Right? And that in and of itself doesn't require a blockchain, but in order for us both to trust the smart contract instead of a person in the middle who might say like, yeah, that's viewable, that's not viewable, that's not an impression, you're getting screwed, like we need to use very consistent metrics. So moving from gold nuggets to gold bars.
Okay, so it's like, this question kind of still exists in my mind. Why will blockchain, in your case, force a consistent metric, and in your case, Daniel, why will it let us reconcile data?
Okay, you want to speak to the data piece and give them a moment? Or however you want to do it. Mark,
It's like, why does blockchain so...
Okay, so the data piece is really important, right? So we view the world, right? I'm going to tell you how I view the world, and from the standpoint of an impression by impression basis. If you have 8 million transactions that your impressions you're paying for as an advertiser or agency, then you can go in and audit with real time. You can literally get access to RTB data. There's a bid request, a bid response, and win notice. Those 3 pieces of data are attached. We call it a triad at home. And then that triad, you can click on that link of that impression. You can search it because it's searchable. So now I know how much it costs. I know what, if it was an iPhone, it is auditable in a way that presently doesn't exist. There is no way to physically presently audit. If you wanted to see what you paid for, there is no current way to audit it.
Because we use the word middleman, but why don't we substitute this word for service provider? Every middleman provides some service.
Yes.
You were not forced to go to this
Yeah, but did their
special
cheap
system.
rate justify that service?
That's
Yeah.
Does an
but
SSP
you came to this
deserve 30%
service.
of that buy? No.
Exactly,
DSP
agreed.
deserve 15%.
Totally.
You
But
have
you
to
came to
prove
this
that the
SSP,
value
right?
that you're taking out is equal or greater than the value that you're replacing.
In,
And that's the problem.
in neuroscience, it's something we call the battle fallacy, and very simply, as human beings, we either want to fight or fuck. Like, sorry about my that way. And
It's late on Friday.
that's what it comes down to. You want to fight someone and you want to have sex with them. That's really what it comes down to. And I think in the agency,
I think I like to fight with you.
I think it would be fun. Big bad, man. I think both like that as well. With the agency ecosystem, what happens when you have a mismatch, well, with human beings when you have a mismatch, is then it becomes about will. Someone wants to fight more than the other person wants to have sex with them, right? And I think in the agency ecosystem, because the middlemen or service providers, as we like to call them, have facilitated the actual will process, they've controlled perception. And once that perception and will control goes away, then you get a balancing of the ecosystem, which will change even some of the terms that they use.
Guys, listen, I know it's getting late. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to thank everyone again for coming out. Please, round of applause for our panel.
Thank you so much for attending that. I love your video. It's great.